By February of 1958, Che Guevara was consolidating the rest of his power, spreading his message, and even going as far as creating his own radio station, a bastion of revolutionary information that he called Radio Rebelde, Rebel Radio. This radio station not only provided a steady stream of propaganda and news to local Cubans, but it also served as the main communication outlet between different military units of the revolution. This would prove an integral part of Che's July 1958 offensive, in what became known as the Battle of Las Mercedes, in which he led a unit that managed to hold off 1,500 of Batista's troops, preventing them from encircling the rest of Fidel Castro's army. This enabled most of the revolutionaries to escape and regroup. Che would then regain the offensive on December 27, 1958, in an assault against Santa Clara, facing off against government forces that outnumbered his own 10-1. Despite the numeric superiority of Batista's forces, the sheer ferociousness of Che's fighters was able to overwhelm Batista's army, and after just a few days they surrendered, with Batista himself ultimately fleeing the country on December 31, 1958. The departure of Batista was then immediately followed by a broadcast being issued from Radio Rebelde that Santa Clara had fallen to the revolutionaries. On January 2, 1959, Che would lead his rebel troops into the Cuban capital of Havana as the city broke into spontaneous celebrations of his triumph. A few days after his triumphant entry, Che's wife Hilda flew into Havana to reunite with her long-lost husband. Che had a surprise for Hilda, however, in the form of Aleda March, a woman he had become romantically involved with during the many months of his revolutionary ambition. Hilda, for her part, was surprisingly accepting of the arrangement and agreed to a divorce, which was carried out on May 22, 1959. Just prior to his severance from Hilda being carried out on May 17, 1959, Che had issued his most important piece of legislation since coming to power in Cuba. Called the Agrarian Reform Law, Guevara's policy worked to limit the size of farms to 1,000 acres. This meant that all of the wealthy landowners who controlled more land than 1,000 acres would have their property immediately confiscated by the government and redistributed to the poorer residents. This served as a complete contradiction to a statement that Fidel Castro had made just a few months before when he famously stated, "We will not seize any land from anybody," and in reference to the type of government they were building, he declared, "This is not communism." Those who would have their land divvied up and communally handed out to the masses would begin to see things differently, however. Another major aspect of the Agrarian Reform Law was an edict that banned foreigners from owning sugar plantations, a direct effort to end what Che regarded as the imperialist ambitions of outside powers. Interestingly enough, after banning foreign influence on sugar plantations on June 12, 1959, Che was then sent on a 3-month odyssey visiting nations as far removed from Cuba as they could possibly be. Che Guevara took a grand tour of Japan, Sudan, Egypt, Syria, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Indonesia, Greece, Burma, Yugoslavia, and even the cities of Hong Kong and Singapore. However, it was his visit to the Soviet Union that would be the most important. It was during his sojourn in Soviet Russia that Che Guevara began to find leverage with which to push back against the United States. Che struck up a bargain with the Soviets for them to start investing in Cuba's sugarcane in exchange for fuel, while Che lined up the Castro regime to invest into Soviet weaponry, beginning in the shipment of old tanks and jet fighters from the Soviet Union to Cuba. Upon the conclusion of his whirlwind tour, Che returned to Cuba in September of 1959 to find that Fidel Castro had greatly consolidated his power base. The government seizures from the Agrarian Reform Law had vested Castro's government with great power and leverage. Despite the growth of his internal power, however, the Castro government still had plenty of enemies on the outside, and on March 4, 1960, these external threats were made clear when 2 bombs exploded in Havana harbor, destroying the La Cubra, a French cargo boat that had been carrying arms from Belgium. The blast was devastating and is believed to have killed as many as 76 people in the immediate vicinity of the explosion. Fidel's regime immediately denounced the act as state-sponsored terrorism led by the American CIA. After leveling such charges, the Castro government used the event to write a blank check on their purge of anyone they deemed a threat.